this servant of God, not just a gift, but the vessel. Whenever he opened his mouth, he spoke the truth, spoke the truth. This is what was registering so profoundly to my own heart. And then we came, I believe it was to the last service, either the second last or the last service. Brother Branham had come to the close of the meeting, finished preaching.
Do you love him with all your heart? All your heart, just raise your hands high and praise him. Say, thank you, Lord Jesus. What's the matter, soldier boy? You're not going to commit suicide. The devil's lying to you, boy. You've only got a phobia. He's lying to you. He'll drive you insane if you believe him. Deny him. Renounce the devil. I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to renounce the devil and accept Jesus Christ as your healer. You'll go back and be a gentleman and a real man.
I was stunned to have something so abruptly interrupt the beautiful, soft singing of that chorus, I Love Him. And everyone began to crane their necks and look around. And I, too, was looking for the soldier boy. I thought immediately, perhaps it's that one that was in the U.S. tunic uniform that I saw a couple days before. So the meeting just ended, and that's all there was to it. Early Monday morning, we got up about 5 o'clock, or I should say we got up about 4 and left the city about 5 o'clock, began our journey up the Alaskan Highway. Now, no one knew, not even Brother Branham, exactly where I was going to take him. So the town that's immediately north of Dawson Creek is Fort St. John. It's about 45 miles up the highway. When the U.S. Army built the road, and this is very important, they just carved it right out of the wilderness, you see. The town of Fort St. John was more or less the result of the building of the highway, you see. And then the farming country began to open up and so on. So when they carved the highway through just the homesteads and little farms, it cut right through a particular farmyard, leaving the farmhouse about 100 yards off to the right-hand side of the highway. Then, a short distance from there, the road turned into the town, and the town laid about a quarter of a mile up on the right-hand side. So, as we started Monday morning, of course, we were just feeling relaxed. We were in our blue denims, and another brother was along with us at Brother Branham's request, Brother Chris Berg, who both my wife and I knew ever since we were children. And so as we were driving up the road and just speaking freely and very relaxed now, Brother Branham, the pressure of the meetings was off his shoulders, and I was hoping that sometime I would get a chance to talk to him, but I was going to leave that until later on in the trip, if the Lord allowed a chance. So we're just driving up the road, and we're starting to pass Fort St. John. Brother Branham said, there was a woman who came in the healing line praying for a man dying with cancer in Fort St. John. Oh, I said, Brother Branham, that woman was a very good friend of my mother and father's. I've known her ever since I was a little boy. Her name, I said, is Sister Clunt. And Brother Branham just went like this as we were driving now. He said, the man's in that house. And he pointed to that big white farmhouse that was so familiar to me, I had seen it many, many times. When we finally arrived to Brother Southwick's home, I should say to his camp where they were more or less camping right out in the total wilderness. And from his place then we would go hunting, you see. But when I arrived there, I told Brother Southwick what had happened on the platform in Dawson Creek, when Sister Clunt came to him and he told how this man was dying with cancer in Fort St. John. Then I said, as we drove past the town, he cried out and pointed his finger and says, the man's in that house, as we drove past. And Brother Southwick said, well, that's right. He said, I know that man. His name is Ed Thomas. I've known him ever since I was a small boy. And he said, I also know that he's dying with cancer. So you see what had happened now. I got it on the platform as we drove past on the highway, and now out of the mouth of my very dear friend. But now comes one of the most outstanding things. From Fort St. John, about another 250 miles, lays the next small town called Fort Nelson. So we arrived to Fort Nelson around noon. This is really a wilderness town. There's just some motels and things built alongside the road. There was a small hotel, not a very old one, but just built out of wood, you know, a wood structure. And we parked in front of it, walked into the restaurant, sat down, just the three of us, Brother Branham, Chris Berg, and myself. The waitress came, we ordered our food, and just before our food had arrived, before our soup had arrived, the door of the restaurant opened, and in came a face that I recognized as being the young boy, the soldier boy, who I saw in the U.S. tunic back in Dawson Creek. And at that moment, there was a short, quite heavy-set, sandy-haired man. He squeezed between the soldier and our table and thrust his hand down to Brother Branham, and he said, Brother Branham! And Brother Branham was startled, and he put his hand up to shake hands with him. He said, oh, do I know you? No, no, he said, you don't know me. And now he was shaking his hand. You don't know me, he said, but do you remember calling out that soldier boy the other day? And Brother Branham was a little bit, you know, he was taken back. So he looked at me across the table. Brother Eddie, he said, do you remember? Yes, I said, I remember. You said, you're not going to commit suicide, soldier boy. That's the devil talking to you. This man still had Brother Branham's hand. He said, that's right, that's right. That's what you said, that's what you said. He said, this is him. And he said, Brother Branham, the Army doctors put him in my custody. I drove him down from Fairbanks, Alaska, 1,500 miles to get him in the prayer line. He said, we couldn't get a prayer card. We couldn't get him in the line. But he said, I believed that I was going to find you today. And then the soldier spoke up for the first time. He said, that is the truth. So he said, Brother Branham, would you pray for him? Brother Branham said, sure, certainly. But he said, well, perhaps we'll just eat our meal and then we'll pray for him. So these two men said, that's fine, because we need to eat too, and we'll just have our dinner. So they went 2 booths up from us and sat down. Then Brother Branham looked at me, and he said, you see, Brother Eddie, this young man now, probably if God doesn't do something special for him, there may be no hope for him. And I was lost for words. I could see now that the freedom with which Brother Branham was experiencing while we journeyed, now he became serious. He was becoming burdened. He was entering into this young man's need. Truly love projecting is what it was. So while he was eating soup, and I was eating directly across the table from him, he began to have visions. And he said, there was a woman, a blind woman was in the healing line yesterday. And then he just stopped a moment. He looked at me. He said, you see, Brother Eddie, it may be that this woman is praying just now. And he stopped a moment again, just a moment of silence. Yes, he said, she's a young German woman. She has heart trouble, gallstones, and a third ailment that I don't recall just at this time. He mentioned 3 main ailments which she was suffering from. Then he looked directly in my eyes. He said, do you believe, Brother Eddie? Oh, I was trying so hard to believe. I said, yes, Brother Branham, I do believe. He said, now just to help you believe, I'll ask him, and he'll give me her name. And he just stopped for a moment like this. Yes, he said, she's a young German woman. Her name is Sister Fair. He said, perhaps in English we would say fear, but in German it's fair. He stepped back a wee bit. He said, that's right. It was all over then. So he just continued to eat his soup like that. We finished our meal. And then, as soon as we were done our dinner, we moved to the cash desk, paid our bill. Just as Brother Branham was going out the door, this soldier was standing right behind him, and he took Brother Branham by the shoulder. And he had his hand on his shoulder, and he said, Brother Branham, just 2 minutes, just 2 minutes. Oh, yes, Brother Branham said, it'll be fine. So we just, all of us stepped out the door. Now you must notice how the events unfolded now. As we stepped out, there was a small wooden sidewalk, and it went a short distance this way to where the vehicles were parked. Brother Branham and this tall soldier walked down there side by side and stood with their backs to us. Brother Chris Berg and this sandy-haired man came, and we stood together at the cars. And this is what he said. He said, the doctors can't determine what's wrong with him. He's tried to commit suicide 3 times in the last 14 months. He said he has a lovely Christian wife and 2 beautiful children. But he said, we can't figure out why he's trying to destroy himself. Now, while he was talking, I kept watching down there. I wanted to see what was happening. I saw Brother Branham had taken his hat off, and he always held that little cowboy hat he wore over his heart. And his head was bowed, and they were praying. Then he slid that hat back on, and I was just watching, you see. And they both turned around and started coming back towards us. So I was just watching, but as the 2 of them came down, I had to admit immediately that that soldier's face, his whole countenance had completely changed. His face had relaxed. There was literally, without exaggeration, a glow upon his face. And as they walked down that sidewalk towards us, he thrust his arm in the air 3 times, and he just cried out. He said, I'm free, I'm free, I'm free. Well, I knew he was free. They walked up to us, and he said, only I and my wife in this world know what this man told me. And as soon as he did, he said, I was free. So we said our farewells, goodbye. They got in their vehicle, which incidentally was a 1939 Ford pickup. They drove their way on the way back up to Anchorage, or rather to Fairbanks, and we got in our car. Brother Branham was at the driver's at the wheel, driving. I was sitting in the passenger side. Brother Chris Berg was in the back seat. Brother Branham said to me, Brother Eddie, do you know this young man? I said, no, Brother Branham, I don't. He said, he's not a friend, not a close friend of yours. No, Brother Branham. I said, we're strangers. Now, he said, you understand, I'd never tell you. He said, if he was a friend of yours. But just to help you believe, when we went to the end of the sidewalk, he came to us there. And I was familiar with that phrase. Told him he had a lovely Christian wife and 2 beautiful children, but he had been committing homosexual acts with young men. And this complex, he called it, had gripped him. But soon as that spirit was exposed, he was set free completely. I sat in that car and I just couldn't help but say to myself, I've just stepped out of the pages of the Bible. This is exactly what happened in the Bible.